Hello and welcome to Islamic Awakening, the show that delves deeply into the issues affecting both Islam and Muslims today. I am your host, Ahmed Hanif. Today, I'm asking Professor Tariq Ramadan, how has Islamic philosophy impacted on Western thinkers? Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina, and Ghazali were amongst some of the most profound thinkers of that time, with the impact of their work extending to other religious denominations such as Christianity and Judaism. Experts say Islamic philosophy taught these other groups how to reconcile religion and philosophy. The impact of Islamic philosophy on the Renaissance was also very profound. Islamic philosophy originates from a time when Islam had a great influence on everyday life. So just how did Islamic philosophy reach the Western world? And so we open with that profound question. But before we get there, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Ramadan, what do we mean by Islamic philosophy? Is it philosophy with an Islamic twist, a religious twist? Or is it something objectifiable, something that can be implemented by different groups, like, for example, Greek philosophy? Why do we call it Islamic philosophy?
That's a very important question, because when it comes back to our tradition, it's very important to get a right understanding of the terminology that we are using. And in fact, within the Islamic tradition, within the Sunni and the Shia traditions, what we have is something which is a categorization of knowledge and different fields. And we have two main fields that are dealing with philosophy. The first one is from within the tradition, what we call ilm al-kalam. It's the knowledge of speech, but in fact, we translated this into theology. And in fact, to be clearer, it's the relationship between texts and rationality. And al-mutakallimun, those who are dealing with ilm al-kalam, are in fact theologians, but at the same time they are philosophers. So there is something which is rooted in the Islamic tradition, which is very important. This is the essence of how the scriptural sources, Al-Quran as a revealed text, is connected or not with rationality. And what was said by all the scholars is nothing in the text is against rationality. Now what we need to understand is what rationality could get as part of the truth. And here we construct the whole relationship. And there is another field, which in fact it's coming in Arabic, exactly the translation of the Greek word, which is philosophia, which is loving wisdom. And then you have al-faylasuf, al-falasifa. Al-falasifa are the philosophers. In fact, is the Arabic transliteration of the Greek word. And here we have scholars, thinkers, philosophers that are Muslim by tradition and rationalist as to the way they took from the Greek tradition. And this is why we have al-Kindi, al-Farabi, those that you mentioned, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and then a series of philosophers. And this is what we call Islamic philosophy. What is important here is that why do we call them Muslim philosophers or Islamic philosophy is in fact that they were taking from the Greek philosophy and showing from within the Islamic tradition that nothing was in contradiction. More importantly, they were trying to reconcile
with the Quran. I mean,
between the Quran and the Greek logic, for example. And more importantly, they were trying to show that what was coming from the Greek tradition was not in opposition with the revealed scriptural sources. And this is exactly the point where there was a difference between the Christian tradition and the Islamic tradition, because the Christian tradition took over by denying philosophy. And Renaissance means coming back to the Greek tradition on who was between the Muslim philosophers. They helped the Christian tradition to find again something that was forgotten because it was perceived as being against religion, which was not the understanding of the Muslim philosophers.
Why was it perceived to be against religion in the Christian
Because in fact, the Bible was coming from God and giving us the truth. And we didn't need rationality to do so. It was coming from the Bible as a revealed book. And in the Islamic tradition, it was not like this. In fact, the Quran is a call for human beings to use rationality, not to be scared of reason, but to use reason to reconcile your mind with your heart, your faith with your rationality. So there is something which is very important here, which even in the Bible, it is a discussion about, Adam and Hawa in the Islamic tradition, they are asked not to come close to the tree
of knowledge.
But the tree it's not in Islam qualified. It's qualified in the Bible. The tree of knowledge, which is not this in the Islamic tradition. It's just a sense of there are limits. In this, the Greek, the Christian tradition is about knowledge. It's as if your faith should be limited as to the knowledge, which is not in the Islamic tradition. There is silence as to the qualification of the tree in Islam. It has nothing to do with the tree of knowledge. It has to do with a tree, and it's decided by God. Don't come close to this. In the Christian tradition, this is something else, which is very far. In the collective psychology, it's as if more knowledge means less faith. In Islam, it's the opposite. More knowledge means more faith. That's the point. And this is why in the Islamic tradition, from the very beginning, philosophy and the scholars, Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and then Ibn Rushd, and then Ibn Sina, and then even Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was saying, we don't have a problem with rationality. We don't have a problem with this. More importantly, we'll see that the deeper we go, the closer we come to the very essence of what we find in the scriptural sources. So this is what we call philosophy and Islamic philosophy. Now we cannot deny, as Muslims, that in our history, at one point, when the West or European powers took over, from the Muslim viewpoint, this was a danger. And we now had some philosophers or some scholars or some fuqaha, jurists, saying less philosophy and more rules, because philosophy is a danger. It's coming from the West. It's shaking our certainties.
So you're saying that the negative attitude among some Muslim quarters about philosophy is due to the Western colonial influence? Where they want to sort of marginalize that type of influence.
Yes, and more than this, it's feeling that from within the Islamic tradition, some were pushing rationality to a point where you are not respecting the revelation and trying to be completely rational. And in the Islamic tradition, to go as far as possible with your rationality and to acknowledge the fact that with your rationality you are reaching limits. This is not irrational. It's rational to understand that rationality has a limit. That's the point. And this is why faith is so instrumental. But for example, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was dealing with the Greek philosophy, and he understood if we go that way, there is something which is within the essence of Islam is going to be destroyed because of this rationality could become arrogant. And he wrote Tahaffud al-Falasifa, which is rejecting philosophy, when in fact philosophy is confusing rationality with rational arrogance. And he wrote a book which was very important, Al-Munqiz min al-Dalal, which is what is liberating ourselves from darkness, which is, yes, we use our rationality, where we should understand that rationality should be humble enough to acknowledge the fact that there are things beyond rationality. And you know who came with this afterward? And it's not said, not taught in any Western university. The one who said exactly the same based on rationality is Descartes, the French philosopher. And in fact, Descartes read Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. So this is not known. And it's as if, everything came, rationality is coming back to the West from the West. No, we are sorry. Rationality came back to the West through the mediation of the Muslim philosophers. Not only translating the Greek philosophers, but commenting. In fact, in the Middle Ages, the Aristotle who was known by the West was in fact Aristotle read and commented by Ibn Rushd.
Right.
The Aristotle that the West knew in the Middle Ages was the one who was translated and commented by Ibn Rushd, which is not said. It's as if, no, nothing. The Arabs were only translators. No. They were thinkers.
Right.
They were building
and expanding on this.
Exactly, and more than that, and showing how much Islam is putting something in this. So I think that as Muslims today, we are committing a mistake. It's a mistake now just to reject philosophy by saying Islam is only rules and no. We need the philosophy of law. We need the philosophy of life. We need a philosophy of science, epistemology. And this is why we have to reconcile ourselves with something which was there, but we are so scared of colonial powers, so scared by others taking over that we reduced Islam into something which is rules without meaning.
Yeah. Which now leads me to the question, where is philosophy today in the Muslim world? Is it dead? Is it being revived? You know, in the seminaries, for example, that teach Islamic law and so forth. Do we find them teaching Islamic philosophy?
Not enough, that's quite clear. And I would say here that this is where Sunni and Shia should talk to one another. And these are two traditions within Islam that are very important. Why? Because in fact, it's much more in the Shia tradition that we find philosophers than today in the Sunni. And this is coming also with something which was very important, is the role of aql, reason, into our legal tradition. And you will find that this was kept as something essential in the Shia tradition, sometimes neglected in the Sunni tradition in the name of the legal.
That? Because I mean, in the Sunni tradition, you had a very strong philosophical orientation as well. Why is it that you have the difference now that it is continuing in places like Iran? You know, but like let's say, for example, in Medina, you know, or in Al-Azhar,
that's exactly.
It's being discontinued.
It's right.
Why?
Historically speaking, because what happened within the Sunni tradition is to reduce Islam, is to reduce our understanding of our religion into the legal framework, into what is fiqh. Fiqh is Islamic law and jurisprudence. Right. And that's a big problem. Because in fact, when you feel that you are in danger, you always use rules to protect yourself. And in fact, you think it's going to protect, but it's not protecting. Right. The only way you are protected by colonial, intellectual domination is through the meaning, is through rationality, is to understand the rules, not only to implement the rules. So I think that we have to reconcile ourselves with this history and to be able to come back to the roots of our tradition. It doesn't mean that we have to take from the Greek philosophy or the Western philosophy. We should not be scared of other philosophies, but we should reconcile ourselves with our own logic. And this is why Ibn Taymiyyah in the Sunni tradition was one of those who said, be careful, there is something in the Greek logic that it's alien to the Islamic logic. And he was right on this. He didn't want, and this is why sometimes in the West he's completely rejected, not because he was, tough with rules, no, because he was very clear on the fact that we have our own logic. There is a philosophy of law in Islam. There is a philosophy of life that it's taken from the scriptural sources. And the one who made it clear at the end of the 19th century is Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani. Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani came to London, he came to Paris, and he was challenging the philosophers here. He was challenging Renan in France by telling him, no, rationality is not your monopoly. Rationality is also ours. And more than that, we brought back rationality to the West. So don't now come as colonizers lecturing us, while you might have to come back to history and to understand that this is our contribution as much as yours. And more importantly as well, that in Spain, in Andalusia, what also happened, this was the big the great Islamic contribution with philosophers, and this is where you can see from the Jewish tradition that Maimonides was also there dealing with Muslims. Ash-Shatibi, one of the scholars who brought this philosophy of law, which is so important today when it comes to the maqasid, the goals of the Islamic legislation. he was in the West. So by discussing this, we help the Muslims to reconcile themselves with their own legacy, their own history, their own contribution. But also in the West, we come back and say, don't tell us that the West or Europe is only the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Right.
No, it's Judeo-Christian and Islamic. And this is part of the discussion that we need to have on rationality, on the sense of truth, even on doubting. The first one who was talking about doubt was not Descartes. It was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. This is what we find in the book that I referred to before.
Now, what about other currents of philosophical thought in the Islamic world? Like, for example, the Ishraqi school of thought, for example, and other schools of thought very much closely associated with Sufism and so on, like the writings of Ibn Arabi and so forth. Do they or have they also influenced the West in terms of their teachings, their ideas?
Yes, and I think that this is also something which is in our categorization of knowledge. We need also to deal with all the fields where we find a discussion about rationality. And it's very important that you are mentioning Sufism, for example, mysticism in Islam, because very often, once again, as we don't know our roots, we have a double alienation. And we end up saying, you know what, Sufism is coming from Christianity and Buddhism. That's wrong. This is, the first Sufi who was following in the footsteps of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was Hassan al-Basri. And you have all the great a'imma and scholars and Islamic scholars who were very, very much involved in the mystical teaching. And in mysticism, you also have something which has to do with rationality.
Right.
Because there is this very central discussion on al-fitra, our natural yearning, attractions towards truth, towards transcendent. And rationality is very instrumental here. And if you come to the mystical tradition, you can see that the Islamic contribution in this, you mentioned Ibn Arabi, but we have Rumi, and we have al-Junayd, and we have even someone who was at the crossroad between philosophy and mysticism is Miskawayh. And Miskawayh was very important because he took from the Greek that the final goal of life is a sa'ada, happiness. And he added to this something which is coming from the Islamic tradition. But there will be no happiness if you don't reach being loved by God. Hubb,
Right.
al-mahabba, al-haqiqa, which is coming from the Islamic tradition. Look at this. The mysticism is reconciling the philosophy of life with the legal framework and the Greek philosophy, and saying no contradiction between the Islamic, which is at the opposite of all what we had in the Christian tradition when it came to dealing with the Greek philosophy. In fact, in the West, to reconcile the West with the Greek philosophy meant less Christianity, which is not what the Islamic teaching was. But the point was that we are today in crisis because we are falling into the same trap that happened during during the Renaissance in Christianity, thinking that if we are too philosophical or if we are too much,
if we think too much,
it's exactly that's the point. If we think too much, we believe, or our belief is going to be more superficial or weaken or not deep enough.
Right.
And this is why we need to come to this understanding that if we want, upstream from all our problems today, we don't know how to deal with sciences, we don't know how to deal with, social challenges, technology and progress. The Islamic crisis, so to speak, or the crisis among or within the Muslim majority societies is exactly our discussion today, is reconciling meaning, rules, philosophy, and the legal tradition. It's reconciling,
harmonizing all of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, we have about 3-4 minutes left. We're talking about how the Islamic philosophy revives and helps Western philosophy and helps the development of philosophy in Christianity and Judaism and so forth. Why is it that these two philosophies, these two trends, Islamic philosophy and philosophy in the West, take such a divergent path? Why is it when they learn from Islamic philosophy, what is it that they didn't pick up? What is it that they wanted to go beyond, they didn't need for them to end up the way they are?
Because what we were talking about is about the comprehensive way. You know, the first Western philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, they had something which was very essential in our tradition, the religious traditions. It's, in fact, this love for wisdom. It's about trying to get truth to change your behavior. In fact, a philosopher is a wise man. It means he's looking for, or she's looking for the truth, but in order to have a good life, an ethical life.
Right.
In the West, there was a rupture, a fracture between we think, but it doesn't mean that we live as we think. There is, the morality is disconnected from our understanding or our looking for truth. So this disconnect is something that from within the Islamic tradition, it's not acceptable. In fact, Islamic philosophy means, and exactly as mysticism means, I'm trying to get close to the truth to change my behavior into something which is a good life.
Right.
So it has to do with ethics, it has to do with morality. And this is where today we need to come back to this. We need to help the West to come back to philosophy which is not about thinking without behaving. And Islam is obeying in order to reform our behavior, which means the way it's tazkiyat an-nafs, purification of the self, changing our societies. So we need to come to this. We need to come to the very deep understanding that at the end, there is no religion without philosophy. And the true philosophy is to reconnect الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who believe and do good deeds. That's it. That's philosophy.
Beautiful. I think you hit the nail on the head at the end here, because basically when we talk about knowledge as something that changes the person.
Exactly.
You know, knowledge doesn't change you, it's no knowledge. You know, if the philosopher is going to divorce his thinking from his morality, his behavior, himself, you know, then it's not really true thinking. You know, it might be complicated, but it might not be true thinking. And yeah, I think would infuse practically every problem, as you know, that we experience. That if we do not tap into the traditions of the intellectual traditions, you know, and the philosophy that we have developed in order to understand our environment and you know, educate our responses to our new challenges, I don't think we'll be able to make it. And sadly, this is all the time we have. I'd like to thank Professor Ramadan and all of you at home for watching, and until next time, we'll be seeing you later. Goodbye. Assalamu alaikum.